As a city-based school, Regis's athletic program has always been somewhat constrained. Amidst the era of the Great Depression, sports offerings also had to be more carefully considered. During the 4 years the class of 1941 was in attendance, some varsity sports were only organized in certain years and not others. The golf team only played one season in the 1941 boys' sophomore year. Though more popular, the Regis varsity tennis team would similarly only compete for 2 years. During that period, sports like volleyball and soccer had not yet gained widespread popularity. 3 core sports anchored Regis athletics at the time. Swimming was one of them, although even then there were concerns about the lack of student and spectator support. Fortunately, there was just enough interest that Regis was always able to field a team for competitions. Nevertheless, swimming would still seemingly be a secondary sport compared to Regis's 2 most popular teams. Baseball was a big sport then and still is today. In the late 30s, Regis's home field was Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. While kids living in the Bronx must have been happy, others probably found it less ideal. But such is the nature of field sports at Regis. The burly Joe Fallon, one of the boys from St. Joan of Arc, played shortstop. His commute from practices and games in the Bronx to his home in Jackson Heights, Queens, must have been an arduous journey in those days. Likewise for catcher Alphonse Talon, who lived further south in Brooklyn. But it's basketball that reigned supreme at Regis. Just like today, Regis had 3 levels of basketball teams in the pre-war era. There was a freshman team called the Wrens, a JV squad called the Owls, and a varsity team. Within the class of 1941, Joseph Connors was the basketball star. He would not only represent Regis at all 4 years, he would be captain at the freshman, JV, and varsity levels. Hailing from the Throgs Neck area of the Bronx, where his father was a fire department chief, Joe was the middle of 5 children. He was often amongst the shortest on the basketball team, as seen here on the far left on the freshman team. Even as a senior, Joe stood no more than 5'8", but he was fiercely competitive. Joe would also play on the baseball team. His size and athleticism would earn him the nickname Little Joe amongst his friends. Later, everyone at school would call him the Mighty Mite. Joe Connors would be the top scorer in every basketball team he captained. One teammate of Joe's on both the basketball and baseball teams was Charles Cade. Charles had one of the longest commutes to Regis amongst his 1941 peers. He lived in New Vernon in a family of 6.
They weren't a wealthy family by any stretch. His dad was a butcher at a local A&P store. I think he was, a good student, but maybe a little bit of a cut-up. And he did test into Regis, and if you listen to him talk about it, it was uphill both ways to school and snowing every day. I always loved basketball, so I remember when I was maybe in high school age, so say I was 14 or 15, something like that, he had a hoop at his house in Manhasset on Long Island, and he came out to shoot with me. And he was like, I'll beat you at a free throw contest. And I was like, oh man, you're not beating me. There's no way. And he had this granny shot, an underhand granny shot, and it was uncanny. He would make so many of them. And I was amazed. I was like, wow, I never knew.
If Joe Connors made an impact on the basketball court right from the start, Tom Kelly's progression was more steady. By the time Tom was a senior, he'd become one of the team's leading rebounders and scorers. The Kelly family lived in the Bronx, 1 block from St. Francis Xavier Church, where Tom and his siblings attended the grammar school. Tom's time at Regis was challenging. Right after completing an undefeated freshman basketball season, Tom lost his father. The elder Kelly was a city alderman. As the eldest of 4 children, Tom had to suddenly take on much greater responsibilities at home. Tom would ultimately grit through 4 years at Regis. Not only was he able to keep up with his athletic commitments, Tom would evolve into an all-rounder in debates and the Guard of Honor. He was also a strong student, especially in mathematics, which served his ambitions to eventually study engineering very well. The class of 1941 would witness one of Regis's most successful runs of basketball teams ever. When Joe Connors and his fellow class of 1941 teammates were done with Regis basketball, they would have amassed a record of 46 wins, 4 losses, and 1 tie over 4 years. For some of the team, their basketball experience would not end at Regis. In this photo of the 1941 varsity squad, 3 would go on to have a meaningful impact on basketball after graduation, one of whom would be a big surprise.